All right, 3.5, use place value to round decimals. So make sure you are on that page of your notes that says 3.5 at the top. So the good news is rounding decimals is very similar to rounding whole numbers, which you will see. So imagine Maya and her sister want to buy a medium popcorn. About how much money do they need? Well, if I go and say medium, costs $5.45. So about how much money is that? The problem we're going to think about to begin with. So how can I estimate to determine how much money they will need to buy a medium popcorn? Well, estimating, one way we can do that is just by rounding. So on your notes where it says, if I want to, you can write estimate. If I want to estimate, the value of a decimal, I can use rounding. It's a very good use for rounding if I want to say, about how much is it? So there are two common methods that we can use to round. The first one is by using a number line. Should come up in a minute. So we can use a number line to help us figure out about what a number would round to. Okay, so this is just reiterating. We can round the decimals. So what could we round it to? If we're making a number line, what sort of do we need to think about? Well, we could round it to the nearest whole number, the nearest one, or we could round it to the nearest tenth. If we rounded it to the nearest hundredth, it would just stay the same, so that's not very helpful. All right, this should be the number line one, unless I forgot another side. So, because we want to figure out, is it closer to this one or is it closer to this one? So by putting it on a number line, we can really visualize which one it is closest to. Wow, my thing is just being slow today. Thanks for being patient. All right, now it loaded. So again, if we're going to use a number line, so that's number one on your notes, we can use a number line. So if we're going to round to the nearest, how is this pen not going to work? Come on. If we're going to round to the nearest 1, that's the same as rounding to the nearest whole number. All right, got a better pen. So the nearest 1, sometimes it'll say round to the nearest whole number. That's the same as rounding to the ones place. We just want to figure out, sort of, if I ignore the decimals, which whole number is it closest to. So 545, which whole numbers is it in between? Well, I know 5 is going to be one of them, because that's what it starts with. And then I know it's going to be bigger than that, because there's also some cents. And then $6 would be the next whole number. So go ahead and put that on your paper. Well, I'll just have you practice putting 1 on there. I won't make you do a number line for all of them, but it's good to see how it works. Look, 5 and 6. We got it. So then if we think about what is in the middle, that will help us determine if it's closer to 5 or closer to 6. Because that's really what we want to figure out when we round it to the nearest 1, or the nearest whole number, is which of those whole numbers is it closest to. That's all rounding is which one is it closest to. All right, so thinking about what's halfway, what would be halfway? If it helps to think of money, do that. We could say 5.5 or 550 is exactly in between 5 and 6. So go ahead, draw a line as about in the middle as you can. Label it 5.5, 5 5/5, or $5.50. Whatever helps your brain, those are equal numbers. That is the same thing as 5 5/10. Those are equal. So then we just have to think about, okay, if we put 5.45 on there, how does that compare to 5 5/10? So if we have our number line here, where should we put 5.45? 5 45 hundredths, $5.45. Well, notice they added the zeros there. That's also equivalent. I could add a 0 here and think, okay, 45, less than 50. So it'd be right somewhere in this area, $5.45. So then if we think, what would it round to? Would it go up to 6 or down to 5? Well, it is closer to $5, so we know we would round it down to 5. The 5 actually stays the same. The whole number stays the same, but we're rounding it down to that. We're taking away the decimal parts. Make sure I didn't miss anything. Yep, it's less than 5.5. Well, the last one loaded so fast. I was hopeful that this one would load faster. So to sum up that part of it, if we're rounding to the ones, what is the estimated cost? Well, we can round down. The estimated cost is $5. It costs about $5. Now you might say, it's not very close to 5. That's why sometimes we don't want to round to the ones because that's too far away. Just like I wouldn't want to round to the millions always because that might be too far away. So we'll get to that in a second, rounding to a different place. First, I want to talk about how we can use a different strategy other than a number line. We can use place value. So for number 2, go ahead and write we can use place value, which this is the way that I typically go over rounding. It's good to have the number line in our head, but sometimes the step-by-step of using place value is a little bit easier to follow. So if we use place value, get rid of my line. If I was going to use place value, let me just go through the steps. So A, underline the place we're rounding to. So if we're rounding to the ones place, I think it helps to underline that. Then for B, it says look. We need to look. That's on your paper. You are going to write next door. I mean, you can look. You can write, look at the number next door, or look at the number to the right. I usually just say you look next door. Do make sure you look to the right. Right. That's is the one that's going to tell me what to do. So it stays the same if the number next door is 0 to 4. It stays the same. That's for C. For D, it rounds up if the number next door is 5 to 9. A teacher I taught with once would call that high 5. Sorry, that's an F. High 5. Like high 5. And so that reminds you to go high if it's 5 or more. And then for E, if you need to write that down, go ahead. I'm going to erase it so I can add the next step. So E, everything in front stays the same. And then F, everything after becomes a 0. Or in the case of a decimal, we could just say it goes away. Because remember, after the decimal point, you don't have to write those zeros at the end. So just so you know, if you're rounding with decimals, sometimes you won't see those zeros at the end. So let's go ahead and go through the steps with it. So we'd underline our place, we'd look next door. 4 tells me to stay the same, so 5 stays the same. There's nothing in front. Everything after becomes a 0, so I could either write 0.00 or I could just write 5. Which is how I would round it by place value to the ones place. Now I can also round it to a different place. Like I said, to get more exact, we could also round it to the nearest tenth. So if I said, okay, what place am I rounding it to? The 10th place. I need to underline that place. I need to look next door. Okay, that 5 tells me to round up. So then I would say, okay, Everything in front stays the same. The 4 goes up to a 5. I can change that 1 to a 0, or I could just not write it because it's after the decimal. The zeros at the end can be left off. So this would be rounding it to the nearest tenth. So if I said about how much is 4.45 rounded to the nearest tenth, I'd say, oh, it's about 550 or 5.5. 5 and 5/10. That is the tenths it is closest to. So it gives a better estimate, right? If we said, oh, $5 is really far away from $5.45, whereas $5.50 is much closer. So the farther right I round it, the closer it'll be, which can be helpful depending on what it is. And a lot of times we round sort of intuitively. If we say, what's 545 close to? Oh, it's close to 550. But sometimes it is good to go through the exact process. So we could say they need about $5.50. Okay, we can round decimals to make reasonable estimates on the number line. This is just a review. Use place value. Again, look at the number, do our process. How precise the estimate needs to be affects what we round it to. Or if the problem tells us, then that's how we decide what to round it to as well. So let's do some practice problems. Oh, I was doing so good. Did I jinx it? Refreshing it when I pause myself helped. Okay, so 78 and 39 hundredths. What is it rounded to the nearest whole number? Go ahead and choose. All right, hopefully you got it right. The whole number, again, remember, is the ones place. I can look next door at the 3. The 3 tells me to stay the same, so I round it to 78 or 78.00. Either one would be correct. If you're like, I don't get it, keep watching. If you still don't get it, then make sure you ask for help, because I know sometimes rounding can be tricky. Okay, what is it rounded to the nearest whole number? Again, I underline the whole number. Look next door. 0 tells me to stay the same. So it's just 4 or 4.00. If I think of it on a number line, I could say, okay, it's in between 4 and 5. And then 7 hundredths is definitely way down here. So if I think about 4.50, 4 and 50 hundredths being there, 7 is a whole lot less than 50. $12 and 7/10. What is it rounded to the nearest whole number? Well, whole number is that 2, that in the ones place. 7 next door. 7 tells me to round up, so I go up to 13, because everything in front of that 2 stayed the same. The 2 went up to a 3. Remember, I could also write 13.0. Those are equal. All right, we're going to skip that whole number because we've done a few and I want to show in different places. So if I say rounded to the nearest tenth, then I need to remember, oh, tenth is right next to my decimal to the right side. Look next door. 9 tells me to round up, so the 8 goes up to a 9. Everything in front of it stays the same. Everything after, either I write a 0 or I just don't write anything, and I could write 42 and 9/10. Either way would be a correct rounding of 42 and 89 hundredths. All right, the nearest tenth. 6 is in the tenths place. Look next door. The 5 tells me to round up. So I round up to 3 and 7/10, or 3 and 70 hundredths. I know I'm going quick, but I just want to show some examples, and if you need more help, that's fine. I'm going to keep going, because again, I think either you're getting the hang of it or just stop and I can totally show you more examples. All right, I thought this was an interesting STEM connection. The mass of the sun takes about 99 0.86% of the mass of